The Perth suburbs of 1986 were thrown into fear when multiple young women suddenly started to go missing. Too late for several victims, but thanks to one, police eventually discovered the House of Horrors, where sadistic couple Catherine and David Birnie would rape, torture, and ultimately murder. Uncover the dark history of this unique country with this chapter, the Moorhouse Murders. This is Australian Crime Stories. Born within a couple of months of each other in Perth, 1951, Catherine Harrison and David Birnie both would grow up in troublesome households. David Birnie was the eldest of 5 children born to an alcoholic mother and a physically handicapped father, living in a semi-rural suburb on the eastern outskirts of Perth. The family environment was reportedly chaotic and unkempt, with rumours circulating about incest within the household. Their home was described as filthy, and Mrs. Birnie was known to swear frequently, neglect personal hygiene, and fail to prepare proper meals for her children. She was also known to exchange sexual favours with taxi drivers for rides or money. Following a family move to a different suburb, the Birnies found themselves living next door to a lonely, motherless girl named Catherine Harrison, who was then 12 years old and living with relatives. Catherine's early life was marked by tragedy. Her mother had died giving birth to her younger brother when Catherine was just 2 years old, and that brother also died shortly after. Catherine later moved to South Africa, where she was subjected to abuse by her father. Eventually, she was brought back to Perth to live with her maternal grandparents. When her strict and isolating grandmother suffered an epileptic fit, Catherine was then sent to live with her aunt and uncle in the inner Perth suburb of Lathlane. Living nearby was a smart but wild teenage boy her age, David Birnie, and before they turned 14, they had already entered into a sexual relationship. David was a charismatic conversationalist, well read on topics ranging from politics and science to the Egyptian pyramids, captivating Catherine with his knowledge. Unfortunately, welfare officers had to repeatedly remove the Birnie children from their parents due to their neglectful environment. All 5 children were placed in separate foster homes. During this time, David and Catherine lost contact, at least for a while. As a young man, David was a slight, thin build and left school early after enduring frequent bullying. He trained as an apprentice jockey at Ascot Racecourse, but his behaviour quickly earned him a bad reputation. He was known for abusing animals and exposing himself. His job ended when his employer discovered he had attempted to assault an elderly woman at his boarding house, breaking into her room naked with a stocking over his head in a failed attempt at rape. In Perth's small community during the mid to late 1960s, David reconnected with Catherine. By this time, he already had a juvenile record for petty crimes, including theft, burglary, and assault. Catherine had left school to work as a machinist in a factory for window blinds. During this period, David's obsession with pornography, fetishism, and sex grew, according to his brother. He also claimed that David's mental stability depended heavily on needing nightly sexual activity. On one occasion, after going a couple of nights without sex, David asked his younger brother if he could have sex with him. When the teenager refused, David woke to find him attempting to assault him. By 1969, both aged 18, David and Catherine faced charges in Perth Police Court. David for breaking into a drive-in theatre and stealing a safe, and Catherine, who was at the time pregnant by another man, for her involvement. David was sent to prison while Catherine was placed on probation. Upon his release around mid-1970, David reunited with Catherine, and together they committed more thefts. Their criminal activity continued, leading David back behind bars. Catherine was also imprisoned for 6 months, during which her infant child was taken away by welfare authorities. While incarcerated, Catherine was advised by an officer that her life would be better without David Birnie. Following that advice, she found work as a nanny and housekeeper for the respected McLaughlin family, and her child was ultimately returned to her. She, however, later became pregnant by one of the sons, Donald, and on her 21st birthday in 1972, they married. The couple would go on to have 7 children, but tragedy struck early when their first child, Donnie Jr., was hit and killed by a car in their driveway at just a few months old. An accident witnessed by Catherine that would leave a lasting scar. Donald supported the growing family until a back injury incapacitated him, forcing them into government housing. Catherine struggled with housekeeping, and her children often ran wild. Meanwhile, David had married another woman with whom he had a child. By around 1983, Catherine and David rekindled their relationship and began an affair. In 1985, Catherine left her husband and her 6 children, the youngest only being 3, to live with David Birnie. They never legally married, however, Catherine did change her surname to Birnie. The couple moved into a modest home at 3 Moorhouse Street in Willagee, Fremantle, where their heinous crimes would unfold. David found work selling car parts at a nearby wrecking yard and was surprisingly regarded as dependable, intelligent, and easygoing. At home, neighbours saw the Birnies as quiet, private people who kept to themselves. Behind closed doors, however, they engaged in heavy drug use, including cannabis, heroin, and prescription medications. David's compulsive need for sex also continued, requiring it up to 6 times daily. He even injected anesthetic into his penis to prolong his sexual performance. The couple experimented with sex toys, and David's fantasies of rape and murder would grow darker and more concrete. Eventually, he confided in Catherine that if she helped him abduct, restrain, and sexually assault a young woman, they would both achieve the ultimate sexual satisfaction. For reasons still debated, Catherine was willing to participate. In September 1986, David Birnie placed an advertisement in a local newspaper to lure potential victims. The ad read, "Urgent, seeking a lonely person, preferably female, 18 to 24 years old. Will share a single-room flat." Around this time, a young woman named Mary Frances Nielsen, 22, approached David at his spare parts yard to buy some tyres. She was a university student studying psychology and had long, wavy brown hair. When David suggested she come to his house to take advantage of a special deal on tyres, she agreed. On the evening of October 6, 1986, Mary arrived at 3 Moorhouse Street, an unremarkable single-level house with an overgrown garden. Once inside, she was chained to a bed, and David Birnie proceeded to sexually assault her in front of Catherine. After the assault, David expressed a chilling desire to end her life. The two then took her to a secluded spot known as Glen Eagle State Forest, about 50 kilometres southwest of Perth, where she was raped again. As she begged for mercy, David strangled her with a nylon cord. He then stabbed her and mutilated her body. Approximately 2 weeks later, Susanna Candy, a 15-year-old girl, was hitchhiking along Stirling Highway in Claremont, an area where years later many young girls would mysteriously disappear. Susanna was known for her intelligence, friendliness, and excellent grades at Hollywood High School. She was the daughter of Dr. Douglas Candy, a highly respected ophthalmologist in Perth. Her father was generally wary of her working a part-time job at a restaurant and often met her afterward to escort her home. On Monday, October 20th, 1986, Susanna was walking alone when Catherine spots her. She says,
"I've got the munchies,"
to indicate a new potential victim to David. He responds,
"I've got the munchies too,"
confirming the girl's fate. Presenting themselves as harmless, they pull up and offer her a ride. The presence of a woman in the car likely provided some comfort to the teenager, and she accepts. Although, instead of taking her home, the Birnies drove her back to their house on Moorhouse Street. Once there, They chained her to a bed and subjected her to repeated sexual assault over several days. During her captivity, the couple made her write letters to her parents claiming she was safe and simply needed some time to resolve personal issues. Eventually, David Birnie, growing impatient, produced a nylon rope and attempted to strangle her. Susanna went into fight mode, pushing back fiercely and resisting him. The Birnies then forced sleeping pills into her mouth, rendering her unconscious. While she was in a drugged state, David Birnie again used the rope, whilst Catherine Birnie ultimately carried out the killing, strangling Susanna to death. Afterward, the couple transported her body to Glen Eagle Forest, where they dug a shallow grave close to the site where they had buried Mary Nielsen. They later sent one of Susanna's letters and, 2 weeks afterward, the second one. Susanna's family had already reported her missing. However, authorities still believed she had run away rather than been abducted. On Saturday, November 1st, 1986, Noeline Patterson was returning home from work when her car unexpectedly ran out of fuel. She was 31 years old, graceful, attractive, and had a successful career. Noeline had previously worked as a flight attendant, and her most recent position was at Nedlands Golf Club. She lived with her mother in Bicton, a suburb along the Swan River in eastern Perth. While standing beside her stranded vehicle, Noeline noticed a couple pull up nearby, and she felt a sense of relief. She recognized them. They were the Birnies, who had helped her wallpaper a room in her house just weeks earlier. Expecting assistance, she got into their car. Her relief quickly turned to terror when David Birnie brandished a knife at her throat. He drove her to their house, chained her to a bed, gagged her, and subjected her to repeated sexual assaults. Catherine became increasingly insecure this time because David actually liked Noeline as a person, and she wasn't entirely comfortable with what was happening. Noeline was kept as their sex slave for a couple of days. David Birnie showed hesitation about killing her, often postponing the decision, but after 3 days, Catherine took matters into her own hands. She held a knife to Noeline's throat and demanded that David choose, her or Noeline. David then forced sleeping pills down Noeline's throat, and when she became unconscious, he strangled her while Catherine watched. The couple then transported her body to Glen Eagle Forest, where they buried her in a shallow grave. On November 4th, just 3 days after the previous incident, Denise Brown, a 21-year-old part-time computer operator and babysitter, was waiting at a bus stop near Stirling Highway in the Fremantle suburb of Coolbellup. She had just left a tavern and was standing alone when she was approached by a pair of seemingly friendly strangers who offered her a ride. Trusting them, Denise accepted and got into their car. Soon after, David Birnie produced a knife and pressed it against her throat. They drove her back to their house on Moorhouse Street, chained her to a bed, and subjected her to repeated sexual assault over the course of 2 days. During this time, the couple forced Denise to contact her parents, falsely assuring them she was safe and just needed some time to herself. Eventually, Catherine Birnie decided she had endured enough of Denise's survival. The couple took her to the Nangara Pine plantation, and although it was still daylight, David Birnie assaulted her again. As night fell, Catherine raised a torch over Denise, while David began to cut her throat with a knife and continued to assault her. Despite her wounds and the sounds of her gurgling, Denise was a fighter and remained conscious and breathing. Catherine then retrieved a larger knife from the car, and David drove it directly into her chest. They dug a shallow grave and began to cover her limp body. However, as they tossed earth over her, Denise suddenly sat up and gasped for air. She was still fighting. David responded by striking her over the head with the shovel, but she continued to try and sit up. Despite her remarkable efforts, David resorted to bludgeoning her with an axe to ensure her death. This was certainly the most confronting and brutal murder, affecting Catherine in particular and making her more hesitant at the thought of killing again. After 27 days of raping, murdering, and burying their victims, Catherine was finally feeling some remorse, whilst David's violent urges remained intense and unrelenting. On the morning of November 9th, 17-year-old Kate Moyer was hitchhiking along Stirling Highway after a night out with friends. She was heavily intoxicated and accepted a ride from a seemingly harmless couple. They drove her back to her family's house, but as she tried to open the car door, she discovered there was no interior handle to unlock it. David Birnie produced a butcher's knife from his Ugg boot and pressed it to her throat. Terrified, Kate asked,
"Are you going to rape me or kill me?"
To which David replied,
"We'll only rape you if you're good."
They took her to their house at Moorhouse Street, where she was questioned about her identity, forced to take a shower, smoke cannabis, and sit down to watch movies. At one point, she was made to dance to Dire Straits' Romeo and Juliet in front of the Birnies. The first time David Birnie raped her was just after midnight, with Catherine Birnie watching and taking notes. Throughout the night, she was given a pen and paper to write goodbye letters to her loved ones, as if preparing her for her death. She was forced to shower again and was then moved to the master bedroom, where she was raped once more. David handcuffed her foot to his own and gave her some pills, telling her to sleep. Knowing that if she went to sleep, she might never wake up, she secretly hid the pills under her tongue, later stashing them under the mattress. The following morning, the Birnies made her call her parents, claiming she had been extremely drunk. David warned her that if she told them the truth, she would be
murdered like the others.
Being a Monday morning, David, who was respected at his workplace, left the house for his shift at the spare parts shop, leaving Kate alone with Catherine. Preparing for an escape, Kate concealed her lipstick and a piece of paper with her phone number as evidence she had been there. When someone knocked on the front door and Catherine Birnie opened it, she seized her chance. Kate broke the bedroom window lock, pushed the window open, and jumped out onto the driveway. Frightened and desperate, she ran to the nearest house. She knocked on the door, waiting. No one home. She goes to the next house. No one home. The next one. Again, no one home. Panicking about how far off Catherine could be, she ran to a nearby shop. Wearing only black leggings and a singlet, she approached a man standing outside. Hysterical, she begged him,
"Help! I've been raped. Please take me inside and call the police. If a woman comes here claiming I fought with her and that I'm her daughter, don't believe her. I've been raped."
The man took her to the nearest police station. At the small suburban police station of Palmyra, Kate gave her story, but unfortunately, none of the officers believed her. Thinking she was a time waster, they assigned the interview to rookie constable Laura Hancock, who was 22 at the time, only months out of academy, and had never taken a statement before. Kate appeared to be in shock and showed no outward emotion, just very factual in her details. The junior cop was convinced she was telling the truth and that urgent action was needed. She went to her superiors several times pleading Kate's story as truth, but she was told it was a bizarre story and to dismiss her as making a false report. It was only Constable Laura's persistence to her seniors and Kate's many specific details that eventually made the police act. When law enforcement officers initially arrived at 3 Moorhouse Street, the residence was eerily empty. Shortly afterward, Catherine Birnie returned to the house and was promptly taken into custody. Meanwhile, David Birnie was located at his workplace and also detained. Both were questioned separately, but initially they offered minimal information. During their interviews, David Birnie insisted that the young woman had come to their house of her own free will to smoke marijuana and that she had consented to sex. The questioning continued into the late afternoon hours. Eventually, a detective addressed David directly, saying,
"It's getting dark. Why don't you just show us where the bodies are so we can start digging?"
To everyone's astonishment, David responded,
"All right, there are 4 of them."
After hearing David's confession, Catherine also broke her silence, and the police decided to arrest both of them in handcuffs in anticipation of locating the graves. Late that night, a team of detectives reached a pine forest near Nangara, about 30 kilometres north of Perth, where they uncovered a shallow grave. There, among the trees, lay the nude remains of Denise Brown, which had been left undiscovered for nearly a week. By dawn, authorities had travelled across the city and about 80 kilometres south to Glen Eagle Forest, where 3 more graves were believed to be. After some initial difficulty locating the burial sites, they followed directions given by David Birnie, driving along a bush track. They began to dig at a designated spot, uncovering one body. A short drive further and more digging revealed another. These were the bodies of Mary Nielsen and Susanna Candy. Catherine Birnie wanted to lead investigators to the final grave of Noeline, her rival. Along the highway, under a layer of gravel, they found her body. When she saw the remains of Ms. Patterson, Catherine spat on the corpse in contempt. On November 12th, law enforcement formally charged both David and Catherine Birnie with 4 counts of murder, along with additional charges. 2 counts of aggravated sexual assault involving the 17-year-old girl, and 1 count of deprivation of liberty. In February 1987, a court hearing took place where both Catherine and David Birnie entered guilty pleas to all the charges brought against them. Justice Alkin Wallace sentenced David Birnie to life imprisonment, explicitly declaring that his record would state never to be released. The judge emphasised the nature of their crimes, stating,
"These heinous acts were carefully premeditated, methodically planned and carried out with cruelty and relentless brutality in a very short span of time. He is to remain incarcerated for the rest of his life."
Catherine Birnie received a similar life sentence, but with a minimum term that would make her eligible for parole in 2007. When the proceedings concluded, Catherine had to be forcibly removed, screaming, kicking and spitting as she was taken to Bandiup prison in the back of a van. The crowd outside expressed outrage at David Birnie, who, in stark contrast, smiled and blew them a kiss. Throughout his time in prison, David Birnie maintained his violent tendencies, frequently involved in fights, getting beaten and spending significant periods in the infirmary due to injuries. In her first full year behind bars, Catherine Birnie expressed feelings of loneliness and guilt, admitting she missed her partner and blaming herself for their downfall. She confided to a visitor,
I could have stopped that girl. I should have. But it all had to come to an end.
For 4 years, the Birnies corresponded through approximately 2,600 letters exchanged between Bandiup Prison and David's cell at Casuarina. During this period, Catherine received visits from her 6 children and David's first wife. Despite Justice Wallace's statement that her life sentence was to be served under strict security, Catherine maintained hope of parole, claiming she was confused and distressed during her trial, partly due to heroin withdrawal. She reportedly told a visitor,
If I get out when I'm 55, maybe we could be together again. But we'd be too old to do anything.
In 1990, David Birnie claimed that being separated from Catherine was causing him severe physical and mental anguish. Initially, Catherine had hoped to marry her de facto partner once they were incarcerated, but by 1997, her feelings had changed. Her correspondence with David ceased altogether as she began to distance herself. Realising her chances of parole might improve by severing ties, Catherine Birnie started her own campaign to be released. She later confessed to detectives that she participated in the murders solely because she was infatuated with him, and that her involvement in the sexual assaults was motivated by her desire to demonstrate her love. Catherine admitted she was willing to follow him anywhere and do anything to satisfy his darkest urges. Sometime after their correspondence stopped, David was prescribed antidepressants in prison. In 2005, he faced charges for sexually assaulting a fellow inmate, and authorities confiscated his computer after discovering it contained pornographic material. In early October of that year, a bureaucratic error resulted in the loss of paperwork for his antidepressant treatment, and his medication was abruptly discontinued. On the morning of October 7, 2005, prison officers found David Birnie's body hanging from a sheet inside cell 12A in the protective custody unit at Casuarina. No one claimed his remains, and he was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave. During her time in prison, Catherine Birnie expressed remorse for her victims, particularly the youngest, Susanna Candy, who was just 15. She took up painting and became involved in activities within the prison library. In 2007, she applied for parole. Although assessments indicated she posed a low risk of reoffending, her request was denied due to the severity of her crimes. A subsequent application in 2013 was also rejected. Under Western Australian law, her case for parole must be reviewed every 3 years. In 2016, the Prisoners Review Board recommended that she remain incarcerated. Perth QC Tom Percy has repeatedly called for her release, arguing that she is a quiet, unassuming individual described as a church mouse, and that her continued imprisonment is merely an act of revenge. However, the chief investigator on the case, Paul Ferguson, strongly disagreed.
I genuinely believe she has never shown any consideration for her victims, both the deceased and their families,
he told Perth Now.
She's an actor. The person I encountered is all about herself, willing to do whatever it takes. They were parasites living off each other, some of the most wicked people I've ever come across.
In 2009, Catherine Birnie was involved in a security scare at Bandyup Prison, where it was alleged she was caught with a knife. It was also believed she was acting as a go-between for lovers Jessica Stasinowski and Valerie Parashumti, the so-called lesbian wheelie bin killers who are serving life sentences for the murder of 16-year-old Stacey Mitchell. Parashumti is incarcerated at Greenough Prison, while Stasinowski is at Bandyup, with the judge having ordered they be kept apart and prohibited from communicating. Authorities found Birnie in possession of a diary written by Stasinowski, and it was believed she was facilitating correspondence between the two. In 2016, Kate Moyer, the sole surviving victim of the Birnies, launched a petition urging to prevent victims' families from reliving their trauma through the potential release of their attackers. As her next parole review approached, hopes were once again dashed in October 2018 when the WA Attorney General introduced new legislation. Under the new laws, individuals convicted of 3 or more murders on the same day or multiple murders on separate occasions could be barred from parole consideration for up to 6 years. Quigley paid tribute to Moir when announcing these changes, emphasising the importance of protecting victims' families from further suffering. The biggest question with this case is whether there were more victims, or presumably, who were the other victims. Murder Uncovered revealed 3 additional women who were identified as potential victims of the Birnie couple. The program aired an interview with Cheryl Renwick's daughter, revealing her identity as a victim for the first time. Cheryl, a 33-year-old single mother of 2, vanished in May 1986 after being stalked by an unknown couple. Her daughter, along with a friend, recalled seeing a woman resembling Catherine Birnie visiting their house on multiple occasions. Police even recovered some of Cheryl's belongings during their investigation. However, the Birnies were never formally charged with her murder. Another potential victim named was Barbara Weston, who was last seen leaving a Perth tavern on June 27, 1986. Her remains were later found with the killer having removed jewellery and personal items. Details consistent with the Birnies' modus operandi. The program also identified a 7th possible victim, 12-year-old Lisa Mott, last seen entering a yellow panel van in Collie, Western Australia, on October 30th, 1980. David Birnie had worked in the area at the time and was believed to have owned a similar vehicle. An interview with his first wife, however, provided him with an alibi. Additionally, a woman recounted her own experience of being stalked by David Birnie. In October 1985, Birnie repeatedly harassed Audrey Schofield, a receptionist at a small real estate agency near where the Birnies lived. She described how he visited daily for over a week, making comments like,
"I only like brunettes with brown eyes."
and how he would enter her workplace whenever she was alone. Her husband eventually confronted Birnie, which led to her being able to escape his unwanted attention. The crimes committed by David and Catherine Birnie left an indelible mark on Australian society, particularly in Western Australia. Realisation that such heinous acts could be committed by seemingly ordinary individuals living among them prompted a re-evaluation of safety protocols and community vigilance. Parents became more cautious about their children's whereabouts, and local authorities increased efforts to improve neighbourhood safety and crime prevention strategies. The Birnie case highlighted the importance of psychological profiling and the need for effective law enforcement coordination, leading to reforms in policing practices. Legally, the case set a precedent in handling serial killers and sexually motivated murders in Australia. It underscored the importance of confessions, forensic evidence, and victim advocacy in securing justice. The Moorhouse Murders by Catherine and David Birnie remain one of Australia's most chilling and tragic criminal cases. Their troubled backgrounds, dark fantasies, and heinous crimes shocked the nation with the reminder of what evil can hide in the shadows of suburbia. The House of Horrors has become globally known and still stands, currently operating as a rental. Despite their arrest and life sentences, questions linger about the extent of their crimes and the intricacies of their relationship. Join us next time for a new chapter of Australian Crime Stories.